You want to be seen, not just noticed in passing, but truly recognized, acknowledged for who you are and what you do. And that's where it begins. The trap that most people never see coming. Because the moment you need attention, you hand control to the ones who give it. You start adjusting everything about how you present yourself, softening your words so they're more palatable to your audience, performing your thoughts instead of simply having them, curating every moment to maximize the chance someone will notice, not because you're weak by nature, but because you've made visibility your reward. And rewards can be controlled by whoever distributes them. The world doesn't need to silence you if it can simply decide when to look at you, when to grant attention and when to withhold it, when to validate your existence and when to scroll past it. And once you depend on that external confirmation, you're no longer operating freely. You're reacting to the patterns of attention around you, chasing engagement, craving visibility, needing recognition. Your entire sense of value becomes tied to whether people see you, and that dependency becomes a leash you barely notice wearing. Watch closely how this plays out in any social system. The loudest person in the room is rarely the one with the most power. They're the one asking for it desperately, explaining more than necessary to make sure everyone understands their importance, posting more than anyone else to maintain constant visibility, showing more of themselves to prove they're worth paying attention to, hoping someone, somewhere, confirms their existence matters. Every word chosen for maximum impact on the audience. Every action calculated to generate the most attention. Every moment documented to prove it happened and that they were there. It looks like confidence from the outside, like someone who knows their worth and demands recognition. But look closer at the mechanism underneath. They need you to see them to feel real. They need your attention to feel valuable. They need your validation to feel like they matter. That need is what makes them controllable. Because whoever controls the attention controls the person who needs it. Give them visibility, and they perform exactly how you want. Withhold it, and they scramble to figure out what changed. They'll adjust their message, their tone, their entire presentation, all to regain the attention they've become dependent on. That's not power. That's performance anxiety disguised as confidence. But power doesn't ask to be seen at all. It moves whether you notice it or not. It operates independently of recognition or validation. It doesn't need your attention to know its own value. And the ones who understand this start to disappear differently, not out of fear of being seen or social anxiety, but out of control over their own presence. They stop explaining themselves to people who don't need explanations. Stop announcing their moves before they make them. Stop chasing reactions to validate that their actions mattered. They just move, decide, act, exist, without commentary, without performance, without seeking permission through attention. And something strange happens when you operate this way. People start watching you anyway, maybe more than before, because what isn't easily available becomes valuable in human psychology. What doesn't seek attention creates it naturally. Scarcity of visibility makes each appearance more meaningful. Silence makes each word carry more weight. Absence makes presence more impactful. It's counterintuitive, but consistent across every domain. The person posting constantly becomes background noise you scroll past. The person who rarely posts becomes someone you stop to read. The person always available for attention becomes taken for granted. The person rarely seeking it becomes magnetic when they appear, not because of any inherent superiority in their content or character, but because scarcity creates perceived value automatically, and attention follows perceived value instinctively. So the question becomes critically important for anyone creating anything. Are you expressing or are you performing? Because those are fundamentally different actions with different motivations. Expression is what you create when you need to get something out, when an idea demands to exist regardless of who sees it, when you make something because not making it feels worse than making it. The audience is secondary to the act of creation itself. You do it even if no one was watching because it serves you internally. Performance is what you create when you need someone to witness it, when the creation only feels complete once others validate it, when you're making something primarily for the reaction it generates. The audience is the entire point, the reason for creating at all. You wouldn't do it if no one was watching, because it only serves you through their attention. One builds presence that exists independently of attention. The other builds dependency on external validation. And dependency is the easiest thing in the world to control. Because once you need something, you'll do almost anything to keep getting it. You'll compromise your message to keep it palatable. You'll soften your edges to maintain approval. You'll perform the version of yourself that generates the most engagement, even when that version is increasingly distant from who you actually are. That distance between authentic self and performed self creates internal fracture. You start losing track of what you actually think versus what plays well, what you actually believe versus what generates positive reactions, who you actually are versus who gets the most attention. And that fracture is painful even when the attention feels good, because deep down you know the attention isn't for you, it's for the performance you're giving. And if you stopped performing, would anyone still be watching? That uncertainty becomes the quiet terror underneath all the visibility, the fear that you're only valued for the show, not the substance, that if people saw the unperformed version, they'd lose interest completely. So you keep performing, keep seeking, keep needing to be seen. Not because it feels good, but because stopping feels like disappearing. But here's what most people miss about visibility and power. The most powerful people you know aren't the ones constantly visible. They're the ones you hear about, but rarely see directly. They're operating behind decisions, behind movements, behind outcomes, but not performing those operations for an audience, just executing them because execution serves their goals. The visibility comes as a byproduct, not as the objective, and that difference in motivation creates entirely different dynamics. When you seek attention, you adjust yourself to audience preferences. When attention finds you through competence, you adjust nothing. When you need to be seen, you become controllable through visibility. When you're seen because of what you do, visibility becomes irrelevant to your actions. That independence from needing to be seen is what creates real presence, not the performed kind that requires constant maintenance and feeding, but the substantial kind that exists whether anyone's paying attention or not. Think about the people who genuinely influenced your life most significantly. How many of them were constantly visible, always performing, seeking attention? Probably very few if you're honest about it. The ones who actually mattered were probably quieter than that. They showed up when it served a purpose, but didn't need constant visibility. They did things worth talking about, but weren't constantly talking about what they did. They had substance that spoke for itself without needing their narration. That's the pattern that repeats across every field and domain. Substance doesn't need to announce itself constantly. Performance does, because performance without audience is just practice. So it needs constant confirmation that someone's watching, constant validation that the performance is landing, constant attention to prove it's working and worth continuing. But substance exists independently of who witnesses it. A good decision is good whether anyone knows you made it. A valuable skill is valuable whether anyone applauds it. A meaningful contribution is meaningful whether anyone credits you for it. The value is intrinsic, not dependent on recognition. And people who understand intrinsic value stop chasing external validation, not because they don't appreciate recognition when it comes, but because they don't need it to know their own worth. That freedom from needing to be seen changes everything about how you operate. You stop adjusting your message based on what generates engagement. You stop softening your positions to avoid losing followers. Not because they don't appreciate recognition when it comes, but because they don't need it to know their own worth. That freedom from needing to be seen changes everything about how you operate. You stop adjusting your message based on what generates engagement. You stop softening your positions to avoid losing followers. Some will engage and some will scroll past. And none of that determines your value because your value isn't dependent on their attention. That independence is what makes you dangerous to attention-based control systems. Social media platforms need you to need attention. Because attention-seeking behavior is predictable and controllable. Give people engagement when they perform certain ways, withhold it when they don't, and watch them adjust their behavior to chase the engagement. It's the perfect control mechanism that people willingly participate in. But someone who doesn't need the attention can't be controlled through it. You can't manipulate them by withholding engagement. You can't pressure them by threatening reduced visibility. You can't shape their message by adjusting what gets amplified. They're just going to do what they do regardless of algorithmic preferences. And that makes them unmanageable by platforms built on attention dependency. The same dynamic plays out in physical social spaces too. Someone who needs social validation will adjust to group preferences. Someone who doesn't will maintain their actual positions regardless of popularity. The first person is controllable through inclusion and exclusion. The second person isn't because they're fine either way. They'd prefer genuine connection, but don't need performative belonging. They value authentic relationships, but don't need to be liked by everyone. They appreciate being seen for who they are, but don't need visibility to feel real. That selective need, that internal validation, creates immunity to social manipulation. You can't threaten them with isolation because they're comfortable alone. You can't bribe them with inclusion because they're selective about what they join. You can't control them through visibility because they don't need to be seen. So while everyone else is competing for attention, performing for engagement, needing to be seen, the person who needs none of that operates in a different reality entirely. They're creating based on internal standards, not external metrics. They're deciding based on actual values, not social approval. They're existing as themselves, not as optimized performances. And that authenticity, that independence, that self-sufficiency becomes magnetic, not because they're trying to attract attention through absence, but because genuine self-possession is rare enough to be noticeable. Most people are performing constantly, so someone who isn't stands out automatically, not through volume or frequency or visibility, through substance that doesn't require performance to be valuable. The need to be seen is a weakness because it makes you controllable. Through likes, through engagement, through visibility, through validation. Whoever controls those things controls you when you need them. But the person who doesn't need to be seen can't be controlled that way. They're operating independently of attention-based incentives, creating for intrinsic reasons, deciding from internal values, existing as themselves, and that independence from external validation is the quietest form of power, not because it dominates others or forces recognition, but because it can't be manipulated through the mechanisms that control most people. The world is built on attention economies that need you to need attention, but the moment you stop needing it, you step outside those economies entirely. You're no longer competing in games that reward performance over substance. You're just building substance and letting it speak for itself. And substance, real substance, doesn't need to be seen to be valuable. It just is, whether anyone's watching or not.